I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. MessianicApologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for July the 14th, 2025. Today is Monday. We begin a new week. This will be our family and ministry's first full week back from the Messiah 2025 conference. So we're definitely planning to do 5 episodes of Messianic Insider. And looking back at the weekend, we understandably have more news to go through than our theology roundup. That is typically what happens on Mondays. Now, before we get started, I just would like to go through a few housekeeping items. If you have not already, please do go to MessianicApologetics.net. Here in the right-hand column, you see blog notifications. If you will put your email there, you can be automatically notified by email when Messianic Apologetics is updated. So put your email there, hit subscribe, and so whenever we add a new post or we reintroduce something from our archives, you should be automatically notified. That is different from our email update list, which you can subscribe to there with the envelope icon. That's a specific update we have to put together. But we definitely are introducing new things, like for today, this older FAQ was featured Torah, Yeshua. I heard a Messianic Bible teacher say that Yeshua was the Torah made flesh. I do not understand this concept. Can you please explain? So those are the kinds of things you can expect to see. Now, we are back from the Messiah Conference, and certainly we'd like to welcome those of you who we interacted with, we met, those of you who found out about our ministry and are now joining us with Messianic Insider as something very new. And we certainly hope that you appreciate what I like to call the ongoing conversation. Whether it's with Messianic Insider or with McKee Moment posts, I do my best to reach out just about every day to you on social media. Now, what is Messianic Apologetics? Many of you all are familiar with the term apologetics. It comes from the Greek apologia, meaning a defense. And apologetics generally is the defense of the faith. In the context of today's Messianic movement, it's where it intersects with matters of Judaism, Israel, Christianity, and specifically things which involve the Messianic mission, salvation of the Jewish people, and that trajectory of all Israel will be saved, Romans 11:26, culminating in the return of Yeshua. Apologetics is about defending the faith. It's about helping people in their walk with the Lord, answering the difficult questions. Apologetics is not necessarily about defending the status quo. So if there are difficult questions, difficult matters to address, apologetics will definitely bring them out into the open, and it will see that, if necessary, some changes which need to be made to our theology and worldview are necessarily made. Many people think that apologetics, defense of the faith, means defending a particular religious system or a particular worldview. Not all religious systems, not all worldviews are bad, but we are also limited human beings, and if new information comes out about this issue or that issue, and we have to account for it, and we have to make some necessary adjustments or fine-tuning. That's also definitely why apologetics is here. All right, so let's get started on our theology roundup. Monday, we usually have a shorter theology roundup than we do in other days of the week because we've got to get caught up from a lot of the news cycle from the weekend. But we do have an important subject to discuss. In the description, Messianic Apologetics editor John McKee discusses how Jewish and non-Jewish believers expressing common faith in the Messiah as the most important thing is a frequently overlooked commodity. Indeed, what is the most important thing for us as men and women of faith? The most important thing for us better be the completed work of Yeshua the Messiah on the tree of sacrifice. The Messiah event, his death, burial, and resurrection. The Son's willful obedience to the Father to be sacrificed for fallen humanity. So I'd like to direct you to our ministry's second statement. This has been something which I've talked about going back to even last year. Do we need to release a second statement, something which goes beyond the statement of faith dealing with core essential beliefs, goes to that second tier of issues? The second statement includes a lot of different issues which go beyond the main statement of faith, but definitely involve things which are important for us as Messianic believers. And so the first section of the second statement is the faithfulness of Yeshua. Now, what is that? It is something which I've definitely written about. It's something I've taught about before. Nothing in the second statement includes things I have not already written about, commented on, or spoken about. But this is something which I believe is absolutely imperative for us to keep in mind as we enter into the future. Having attended Messiah 2025, I do not believe that formal Messianic Judaism is going to disappear. I do believe it's going to be able to duplicate itself. At the same time, I do have some concerns for all of us in the Messianic sphere of influence that we have got to get our spiritual priorities right, especially with the increasingly more complicated future we see in the world. So I'd like to briefly go through this. The faithfulness of Yeshua. The most important central feature of our belief system is the completed work of Yeshua on the tree of sacrifice, dying for our sins and being resurrected from the dead. Luke 24:46, Acts 2:23 and 24, 1 Peter 3:18, Romans 5:6-11, 6:4, 1 Corinthians 15:3. The Messiah event is the most important event in human history, Romans 3:21. The faithfulness of Yeshua the Messiah, Galatians 2:16, 3:21 and 22, 3:21 and 22, Philippians 3:8 and 9, Ephesians 3:11 and 12, may be properly regarded as his willful obedience to the Father unto death for sinful humanity. Now listen to me very carefully here, because this is where we see things getting a little more complicated in the spirituality of Messianic people or those within the Messianic sphere of influence. Jewish identity is something important, should be maintained by Messianic Jewish believers, and should be valued by the body of Messiah. John 4:22b, Acts 23:6, Romans 3:1 and 2, 9:4 and 5, 11:29. But it is not the most important matter of faith. Philippians 3:2 through 10. A Torah foundation for one's theology is important. Deuteronomy 4:6, 11:1, 30 verse 16, Psalm 119, Romans 3:31, 2 Timothy 3:16. But there is a such thing as Torah-olatry, which can manifest among many who strongly identify as Torah observant or as part of the Torah movement. John 5:39 and 40. Both the Messianic Jewish believer's heritage and or possessing a Torah foundation in one's understanding of the Bible are secondary to the identity the redeemed are to have in the spiritual transformation provided by the work of Messiah Yeshua. And indeed, I believe that Messianic Jewish believers maintaining their Jewish heritage is absolutely imperative. I believe that having a Torah foundation in one's theology is absolutely imperative. But who we are because of what Yeshua has done for us is the most important thing. And are we in danger sometimes as Messianic people losing sight of that? Yes, we are. No man or woman claiming to have salvation in the Messiah of Israel will easily make it into the future to the days leading up to his return without placing the Messiah event at the very center of who they are. So unless we as today's Messianic people can truly recapture in some cases a sense of who Yeshua is, what he did for us, his example of service to others, his willful sacrifice for human sinners, his resurrection from the dead, his ascension to the Father, and his return. If we cannot recapture the significance of that, then we will have, at the very least, an off-kilter spirituality. And indeed, not to belabor any points too much, we see people, their Jewish identity, their Jewish distinction is the most important thing, not the work of Yeshua. Doing things of Torah, various outward matters of Torah, Torah study, it's the most important thing for them, not taking into consideration the challenge of Yeshua, the definitive interpretation of Moses provided by Yeshua, and certainly the subversive example of Yeshua to many Second Temple Jewish norms. And notice I did not say Yeshua did not live as a Jewish person in the Second Temple period. I very much believe Yeshua observed the mainstream traditions and customs of his time. That doesn't mean that Yeshua wasn't a challenging figure and didn't push the envelope at times as well. So having a better feel for the centrality of Yeshua, his completed work, and how that is where our identity is to be found is going to be very interesting to see manifested in the days ahead. And all of our problems, all of our challenges about the future can ultimately be rectified by returning to a Messiah-centric faith. And those problems can be seen to get bigger by dismissing a Messiah-centric faith. The first thing that has to come out of your mouth when somebody says, what is the most important thing to you, better be, on date X, I had a supernatural transformation with the Creator God of the universe when I received his Son into my life and was freed from the condemnation of sin. You better hear something along those lines, not, well, I'm Jewish or I do Torah. You better hear something about a dynamic salvation testimony. And please, didn't say being Jewish is not important. I didn't say that having a Torah foundation in one's theology is unimportant. But we've got to return to that Messiah-centric faith. Otherwise, we're not going to easily be able to make what's coming down the pike. All right, so that finishes our theology roundup. Tomorrow we are going to have a much longer teaching. We usually do a longer teaching on Tuesday because we don't have to get caught up on a weekend's worth of news events. Now, all of the links I'm about to go through, they will be available for you to look through when this episode is archived later today on MessianicApologetics.net, whether that's a news article, social media post, video, whatever it is. A lot took place since Friday afternoon, since we last had Messianic Insider. I apologize if we're not going to cover every single news story. These are things which mostly have come across my path passively on social media. So you're doubtlessly familiar with some of them, but some others of them maybe not so much. All right, so let's get started. Okay, we start out with something from Friday afternoon, July the 11th, from Open Source Intel Defender. Anybody who thinks that the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran is over is sorely mistaken. We have only kicked the can a bit farther down the road. It's not over, and peace will not be possible throughout the Middle East until the fall of the Islamic Republic and the total destruction of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Okay, that is an opinion, of course, but certainly there are many people, especially Iranian expatriates, Iranian Christians, who believe that regime change is inevitable, some kind of new Iranian democracy or a constitutional monarchy with the return of the exiled crown prince. The new Shah is inevitable. We can certainly pray along those lines. We do know that even now with the 12-day war over, people are still talking about, hey, is this thing going to, rekindle? This conflict is going to, restart. What's going to happen? What about discussions with Russia? What about this? What about that? A lot of talk, and of course, all we can do is monitor it. All right, from Charisma, my Charisma, July the 11th. And this is where, of course, we see discussion, speculation on the Christian side, the prophecy side. Sign of the end, Arab leaders seek peace with Israel. So, of course, there's a lot of speculation about what's going to happen resultant of the 12-day war. What about Syria, Lebanon, other countries? What about the situation in Gaza? There's a lot of talk, and some believe that we're being set up for the Daniel 9 covenant with many. How soon? How not so soon? We know that because of the recent war, Israel and Iran, we're waiting to see how the dust is going to settle, and there's going to be a lot of speculation. If you have not already, I do encourage you to look through the McKee moment I posted yesterday afternoon. It's entitled The Damage of Newspaper Eschatology, people taking news headlines and reading them into the scriptures. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to monitor what people are saying and try to stay grounded, but at the same time, be astutely informed. There are people in Messianic congregations and fellowships who are not very well grounded. They operate in a lot of fear. They operate in a lot of anxiety because nobody is really there to, I hate this analogy, but hold their hand as we see what is taking place in the world. All right, another one from my Charisma. This is certainly something which gets a lot of people going, a lot of speculation, although I've heard about this for many, many years. Red heifer burned in Israel, what it means for Bible prophecy. This is also from Friday afternoon, July the 11th. A recent event in Israel has caught the attention of the world again. A red heifer was burned in Samaria, an act that, while not official temple protocol, echoes the ancient purification rites detailed in Scripture and points toward significant prophetic implications. Though the heifer used was disqualified from being the actual one used for future temple purification due to minor imperfections, the ceremony itself was carried out according to the biblical guidelines found in Numbers 19. Okay, so according to this article, at least, this practice run is not just symbolic. It reflects a growing momentum within Israel to reestablish the conditions necessary for the restoration of temple worship. Okay, there are a lot of people who make speculative remarks about the red heifer, its procedure in making sure that a tabernacle and temple can be properly consecrated. The Temple Institute, anyone who goes on a tour to Israel is likely to see the different reproductions they have of different pieces of tabernacle furniture, priestly garments, etc. Not a surprise why you'd want to have some kind of a rehearsal or practice of an actual future event involving the reestablishment of the temple and the Levitical priesthood. That's not a huge shock. But how soon or how close are we? That is another question altogether. It is appropriate, though, that we can recognize how there is a growing momentum, as the article stated, certainly among religious Jews in Israel, to, hey, when are we going to see the Levitical priesthood return, the temple reconstructed? It's a wide-scale opinion that the Messiah has to come to rebuild the temple. And of course, prophecy people like to jump onto that and conclude that, the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist. Just have to wait and see. All right, so we ended on Friday with the little spat that has been brewing between Attorney General Pam Bondi. What about the Epstein files? This is from July the 11th, the afternoon. The New York Post, FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino butted heads with Attorney General Pam Bondi earlier this week over the Trump administration's handling of its Jeffrey Epstein investigation, including a purported review of the late pedophile's so-called client list that officials now say never existed. We've got a few more things to go through on this, but yeah, there are a lot of questions, not only on the left, but also on the right about what about the Epstein client list and what about this whole thing with the Attorney General and here, Deputy FBI Director and also the FBI Director. From Visegrad 24, this is from Friday afternoon, July the 11th. Trump considering global oil embargo against Russia. U.S. President Donald Trump is seriously weighing the introduction of tough secondary sanctions against countries that continue to trade oil with Russia, including China, India, and Turkey. The plan involves supporting a bill that would impose a 500% tariff on imports from Russia, effectively amounting to a global oil embargo. Now, there are ongoing questions about the Russia-Ukraine controversy. Donald Trump campaigned last summer on stopping this conflict. Of course, he's been in office now for over 6 months, and while he's had some communication with Vladimir Putin, it doesn't appear to be stopping. So Trump, I believe, rightly wants to see this end. He wants to see the loss of life end. How does that happen? Well, are we going to see, tough economic sanctions like this? One of the things we know with the Trump presidency, Trump does not act in a conventional manner like others. So here's one possibility. From Wired, so this is not exactly from a conservative news source, but this is from July the 11th. Metadata shows the FBI's raw Jeffrey Epstein prison video was likely modified. There's no evidence the footage was deceptively manipulated, but ambiguities around the video, how the video was processed, may further fuel conspiracy theories about Epstein's death. Yeah, this is not a comfortable subject to address. Of course, there are a lot of questions about did he commit suicide? Did he not commit suicide? What's the deal here? And what did he know? And what would that do to not only contemporary politics, but a lot of other fields of importance, entertainment, industry, etc. So I'm certainly not the only person who's got unanswered questions about this. Okay, this is not the only source which mentioned this, but this is the first one which came across my feed from Gateway Pundit. FBI Director Kash Patel considering resigning if Bongino leaves. Now, this is, of course, something which can change from day to day. We don't know what's going to happen with Kash Patel or Dan Bongino, but we know it's all tied into this whole Epstein case. And, you know, a lot of people, because of what was stated by President Trump and Attorney General Bondi last week, whether they're on the right or even on the left, have just got a lot of questions about, hey, we thought this was a big deal, and now you're saying it's not so much. Why? And a lot of people are very upset. They're disappointed. They're even infuriated to a certain degree. People who, I didn't vote for this, Trump. What's going on here? Okay, let's just change gears ever so slightly. This came across my social media feed, and it's from Christians for Biblical Equality, which is one of the main evangelical egalitarian organizations. So here's a quote. We hold fast to Scripture's teachings that, when properly understood, lead couples, that would be married couples, heterosexual married couples, toward mutuality that includes kindness and consideration rather than obsessing over who is in charge. So, in an egalitarian model of marriage, one man and one woman, the most important thing is, of course, husband and wife working together, looking out for one another, serving one another's needs, emotional and material, always being in communication with each other, doing things like praying together, studying Holy Scripture together, talking about the issues of the day, being one flesh, working together as one, rather than some, although I don't want to say all, some complementarian models where, yes, husband and wife are to be working together, but ultimately it's the husband who is in charge. And I hate to say it, but in today's Messianic community, over 30 years, going back to my time in high school, when, you know, in high school, that's when you start thinking about dating, getting to know the opposite members of the opposite sex, marriage, family, children, all things which I have not been able to participate in, partially because of my participation in the Messianic movement. Seeing the Messianic community's value system, although there are exceptions, it definitely obsesses over who's in charge when it comes to marriage. You know, making sure that the wife is in submission to her husband. Not so much that the husband is making sure that the wife's emotional needs are taken care of and that they are in constant communication as one. This won't be the last time I make some observations about the marital values of the Messianic community. All right, this came across my social media feed. You can read this in greater detail later. There are a lot of claims that support for a Jewish return to the Holy Land, reestablishment of an independent Jewish nation state. Zionism is something very new. The 19th century with Theodore Herzl, the Zionist movement, and then the conspiracy of the Rothschilds funding the Schofield Reference Bible and getting all these Christians to support Israel. Christian theology was devoid of any support for Israel or the Jewish people before that. This is not true. So here you have Matthew Henry, 1662 to 1714, on Romans 11 and the Jewish people. And here you see that, and I'm not going to read all of this, but Now, two things Paul exhorts the Gentiles to with reference to the rejected Jews. Number one, to have respect for the Jews, notwithstanding, and to desire their conversion, meaning they're coming to Messiah faith. They must not insult and triumph over these poor Jews, but rather pity them and desire their welfare and long for the receiving of them and again. And number two, to take heed to themselves, lest they should stumble and fall as the Jews had done. So here you see a very Jewish positive approach to what do we do? What do non-Jewish believers in Israel's Messiah do? And it concludes with, to the extent of it, all Israel shall be saved. Verse 26, that's Romans 11:26. Not every individual person, but the body of the people. So this idea that it wasn't until dispensationalism with Darby and Schofield and others, there was no idea of Christian support for Israel, praying for the salvation of the Jewish people. Not true. And Matthew Henry, we don't have to agree with everything Matthew Henry believed. I mean, obviously, he was from the 17th and early 18th centuries, so some of his theology might be a little dated. But what he says here demonstrates Christian support for Israel and the Jewish people. All right. From Open Source Intel, July the 12th. Iran's ambassador to Russia stated that Iran will not abandon its nuclear program, saying that it's a legal and legitimate right under international law. Okay, so what are their Russian friends going to do with some of their nuclear aspirations? That is an ongoing question. Okay, so this is now that perhaps Elon Musk has parted ways with Donald Trump, parted ways with the administration, we're going to be seeing more about Elon Musk and his enterprises, Tesla, SpaceX, and X. So I thought this was interesting. From Instagram Future Tech, Elon Musk envisions transporting 1 million people to Mars by 2050 through daily SpaceX Starship launches, aiming to create a thriving human settlement and generate lots of jobs on the red planet. However, experts like NASA scientist Dr. Michelle Fowler caution that with current technology, such missions are not yet feasible. Major hurdles include Mars' extreme distance, 34 million miles, deadly radiation exposure, and the planet's hostile surface conditions. Okay, something to monitor, something to watch. But the point is that you got somebody like Elon Musk with hundreds of billions of dollars who wants to see as many as 1 million human beings on the red planet by the year 2050. I will be pushing 70 by then. Now, before the red planet, before Mars, we're likely to see something on the moon. How are these things going to change human civilization? What if the Lord tarries and within the next 50 to 70 years, so we'll say toward the end of the 21st century, going into the 22nd century, we become a multiplanetary species. Earth, Moon, Mars. Obviously, the first people who would go to monitor a base, monitor a colony, would be scientists and the military. But there are going to be a lot of questions raised just with some of the new technologies which are developed to do this, as well as, new discoveries made on the moon, on Mars. And from that, questions about who we are as humans in this galaxy, in this universe, will necessarily be raised. And you got a lot of religious people who know about this. How many of us in the Messianic community need to start factoring this into various matters? We will wait and see. But I always find this to be fascinating. From Breitbart, this is from Saturday, July the 12th. More bad news for rich Democratic Party radical activist Rosie O'Donnell. Not my favorite actress. Leftist political activist Rosie O'Donnell, who moved to Ireland after President Donald Trump took office in January, may lose her citizenship if the president has anything to do with it. Now, we know that President Trump likes to troll people on social media. I may not be the biggest fan of Rosie O'Donnell. Is this just to stir the pot, or is this to get people to wonder, what do you do with all these left-wing, hyper-radical, Hollywood types? Have they been an advantage to our society or a disadvantage? At the very least, even though here it says President Trump considers revoking Rosie O'Donnell's citizenship, she is a threat to humanity. Some of us may consider that a little over the top, but others of us may say, has her influence been great on our culture? Probably not. And who else is just like her? All right, so some of you all may have seen this. This is another one of those interesting factoids. This came on July the 9th. It came across my Instagram feed. MOA comeback. Peter Jackson-backed project aims to resurrect giant bird within a decade. A bold new plan to bring back the extinct South Island giant moa back to life is underway, and it has the backing of filmmaker Sir Peter Jackson, right, from the Lord of the Rings fame. The project, led by U.S. biotech firm Colossal Biosciences in collaboration with Iwi Nagai Tau, I hope I pronounced that properly, and Canterbury Museum, hopes to hatch the first moa within 5 to 10 years using advanced genetic engineering. So here we have this giant bird from New Zealand, pretty much, which has gone extinct, 3.6 meters tall. So that's between 9 and 10 feet tall, and they want to bring it back to life using genetic engineering and all of that. You're probably not alone if when you saw this, you're already thinking about Jurassic Park. Of course, they got the new Jurassic World movie, which came out. I'm planning to see that later this week. And you're like, weren't we warned about this? And indeed, I mean, this is probably, a harmless bird compared to Tyrannosaurus Rex or a raptor. But still, it's like, how much are we going to be allowed as a human civilization to play God and do things like this, try to bring back an extinct species? All right, from the Jerusalem Post. All right, so some of you all are aware of the remarks made by Tucker Carlson at the recent Turning Point USA event. That's gotten a lot of comments. This is the one which came across my feed, which kind of summarizes a lot of the opinions of those in the Jewish community. Tucker Carlson claims everyone in Washington believes that Epstein was a Mossad operative. In a speech at a Turning Point USA event, conservative TV personality Tucker Carlson questioned if Jeffrey Epstein blackmailed people involved in a sex trafficking scheme on behalf of the Mossad. And so you got a lot of people wondering, well, is Donald Trump secretly controlled by the Israeli government? Is he being blackmailed not to release Epstein because Epstein was this Mossad operative and he's got all this information, which if it gets released is going to not just bring down figures like Trump, but bring down society because we won't know who to trust. Everybody's got dirt. I mean, this is the kind of thing this feeds. And indeed, I don't doubt the fact that there is always more to a story we are not told about. However, is there not some kind of a, larger issue we need to be focusing on as the people of God because of the fact that we do live in a corrupt, sin-cursed world? But Tucker Carlson, he's really not a friend of Israel, not so much of the Jewish people. This is part of that ongoing Jeffrey Epstein subject, and whatever comes of it is not going to be comfortable. I can tell you that. Our trust in people in the government, whether you're on the right or the left, our trust in entertainment, our trust in industry will definitely plummet as a result of this, one way or the other. All right, and here you have Charlie Kirk, who's, of course, a very important part of Turning Point USA, reposting the post that President Trump on Truth Social sent out. President Trump on the Epstein files says he supports Pam Bondi at Attorney General. The files are untrustworthy and created by Comey and Brennan, right? Former FBI director, former CIA director. He wants his Justice Department focused on the voter fraud, the rigged election, Act Blue, and arresting thugs and criminals. Okay, so that's where more questions are raised than not. So Trump, Pam Bondi, they're going to dismiss the whole Epstein thing because we don't know how corrupt it was from the previous administration. Basically, we need to instead focus on election 2020 and get that sorted out. We continue to wait and see. The main thing is that whether you're on the right or the left, trust in government continues to decrease. It continues to diminish. Benny Johnson, here's another conservative commentator responding to Trump's post. So President Trump has acknowledged that the Epstein files exist and that there is something there. He says they were written, however, written by his enemies and therefore will not be released. What? So here's someone who has definitely been an ally of Trump and an ally of MAGA, and he's not happy with this at all. Remember to, like we did with the Israel-Iran conflict, stay grounded and let things naturally play out, at least over multiple days, if not weeks. From All Israel News, and this is an article from Joel Rosenberg, whether you like him or not. Trump leading change of biblical proportion in Israel, Iran, globally, and at home. Ambassador Huckabee tells All Israel News. Okay, now I believe Rosenberg is a pre-tribulationist, but the claim that, especially during the recent visit that Netanyahu made to Washington, are we going to see different presumed biblical matters accelerate as a result of the Trump administration? We don't know, but we do know that we have to pay attention. That's as far as I'm willing to go, because while there are worse people out there, Joel Rosenberg is of that stream that tries to practice newspaper eschatology. I'm sorry, I just had to say it. Taking biblical themes, seeing that they are forced into current events. We're just trying to monitor what people are saying, what people are doing. And unless we know what is happening in the world, we have a good feel on it, how are we going to be able to calm people down who get unnecessarily ginned up or riled up when things, for example, we're going to have a few things to discuss about this in a moment, things which some every fall high holiday season anticipate to occur don't necessarily occur. So here we have a post which definitely can be described as newspaper eschatology. Joel Richardson, who is not a pre-tribulationist, forwards on something from Amir Tsarfati, who is an Israeli Jewish believer, definitely dispensationalist, definitely pre-trib. He says, every summer, like clockwork, sensationalists revive the red heifer drama as if a third temple is about to be built. Hold your horses. No institution exists to declare a red heifer, nor is there a red heifer to be declared. Now, this is what you have to keep in mind here. For the 1,000th time, as long as believers are still here, the Antichrist won't be revealed, and thus a temple won't be built. Okay, so Sarfati's view is basically that, hey, don't worry about it. Yes, you see some echoes of this, but none of this is going to take place until after the pre-trib rapture. So Joel Richardson, who's not pre-trib, responding to this, the dangerous logic behind dogmatic pre-tribulationism. Will it ever be said for the 1,000th time, this cannot be the Antichrist because we are still here? So we're here to monitor things. We don't want to paint ourselves into a corner. This has got to happen now. This has got to happen right, in the next year. Otherwise, we can't trust the Holy Scriptures. We don't want to be caught into some of those paradigms. But we know that there are a lot of people who make unwarranted speculations, or should these things actually be occurring in the future? Well, it can't occur because the rapture hasn't happened. Plan for the worst and be pleasantly surprised if pre-trib is true, which I don't believe it is. All right, another opinion from open source intel defender. U.S. President Donald J. Trump calls for people to leave Attorney General Pam Bondi alone, stating that she is doing a fantastic job. Trump then claims that the Epstein files are a Democrat hoax created by Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, James Comey, John Brennan, and the Biden administration. Okay, so that is the narrative which President Trump wants people to be considering. Can't trust the Epstein files because they've been corrupted or they've been fabricated, whatever. Focus instead on the 2020 issues. But thinking, if you think multidimensionally, making these kinds of statements, well, still, if they have been tampered with or fabricated, shouldn't we still know what they have to say? And that's something which people not only on the left would want to possibly see, but people on the right as well. So again, stay grounded with this situation, let it play out over some time. And of course, if we're patient enough, the truth always comes out. That's what happens in life. All right, so here is something which came across my X, formerly Twitter feed, from Hen Mazig, author, wrong kind of Jew, senior fellow. Okay. Breaking: 1 in 4 Americans say recent attacks on Jews are understandable. A new ADL survey reveals that 24% of Americans either justified or endorsed violence against Jews. The same percentage believe the attacks were staged to gain sympathy for Israel. Oh my. Hate speech has reached such terrifying heights that a quarter of Americans see no problem with a young couple being gunned down outside a Jewish museum in D.C. or an 82-year-old woman burned alive in Colorado. This is pretty despicable. 1 in 4 Americans say recent attacks on Jews are understandable. And indeed, that's not saying, we have to all be aware of anti-Semitism, whether you're here in the United States or elsewhere in the world. And what are some of the causes behind it? That's one thing. But to say, well, they're understandable because of the frustrations of the Palestinians or this or that, we should abhor all violence against all people, especially civilians like this. This came across my social media feed on X from Dale Partridge, who is a Reformed pastor. And he says, dispensationalism is cancer for Christendom. Now, on the one side, we've seen posts from him which are anti-Israel and anti-Zionist. The church is the new Israel, all that kind of stuff. But here, he's focusing on dispensationalism and what he considers to be the negative effects of the pre-trib rapture. I met a married Christian man with children in his 30s yesterday who said, we're not going to purchase a home. Jesus is coming back so soon. We're just going to keep renting. His conclusion: eschatology shapes everything. It builds or it burns. It works or it waits. It pushes men to plant orchards and build cathedrals, or it paralyzes them into waiting, thinking that the world is a sinking ship. Saints, what you believe about the return of Christ will determine if you leave a legacy or leave nothing at all. So here, his view is that an imminent pre-trib rapture will cause some to just not really invest in life, to the point where I'm not even going to buy a house. Of course, we don't know anything about this person's economic disposition, and just going to wait until Jesus comes and raptures us up into heaven. Now, there are dispensationalists, pre-trib people who are caught doing things like this. The exact opposite side are that there are pre-tribulationists who they just think about human living. I'm just going to live my life. I'm going to go get a good job. I'm going to have a good family. And I'm not even going to think about the end times and its possible influence on me, because one day Jesus will return and just surprise us, and we'll go up to heaven, and it'll be like this big giant surprise party. And I don't need to worry about this or that. And they're the kind who are caught up in the days of Noah, days of Lot scenario, having not prepared themselves psychologically for the possibility of difficulty. When a pre-trib rapture doesn't come, are they going to be caught up in the storm? Are they going to be taken, swept away? From open source intel, July the 13th, so this was yesterday, Netanyahu was set to announce a U.S.-Israeli trade deal during his visit to Washington, but the U.S. has postponed the move. Israeli officials say the deal could now be tied to a possible hostage deal that could also end the war, N12 reports. Okay. We definitely know that Trump is out there cutting economic deals, also slapping tariffs on different countries. We'll wait and see what happens. This I thought was very interesting. Yesterday, July the 13th, open source intel, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Hamas will not govern the Gaza Strip after the war. They must hand over their weapons to the PA and end their control. So, regardless of how little some of us may like Mahmoud Abbas, he has an internal problem as a Palestinian with other Palestinians who are aligned with Hamas. Always interesting to note the internal divisions in the whole Palestinian community, just like it's important to recognize that not everybody in the Arab world or the Muslim world is unified themselves. There are these kinds of rivalries. Okay, this is not the only post which many of you have probably already seen, but this is one of the major ones which came across my feed from Justin Peters. And it's the announcement that John MacArthur, who is presently in the hospital with pneumonia, is not expected to live that much longer. Whether you like John MacArthur or not, he was a major voice of influence in American Christianity for sure over the past 50 years. How much of that intersects with the Messianic community? Well, from time to time, I've seen people with a John MacArthur study Bible. I've seen people refer to the John MacArthur Bible commentary. I have some of his resources in my library. I can't always say that I like John MacArthur's style. I found him to be very dogmatic, very rigid, very inflexible. And I know that that style has influenced a number of people, certainly on more the one law side from time to time. But our thoughts and prayers do need to be with the MacArthur family and his upcoming departure. I thought this was interesting. This is from Tracy Costin. This came across my Instagram feed. It is dated to June the 14th, so it's from a month ago. If you watch this post, it talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and compares the different colors to some of the common colors which appear on different flags of Arab countries. And of course, the whole idea is to connect the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse to the Arab world and Islam. How accurate is this? How inaccurate is this? We will have to wait and see, but there should be no question, at least at this point of the game, that Islam is going to play some role, certainly a major indirect role in the end times. That is, to me, beyond dispute. Even people who have focused their attention on a European beast, a revived Roman Empire, look at how the demographics of Western Europe are just radically changing, veering toward Islam. These migrants going into countries like the United Kingdom, France, Germany, etc., and they're outproducing native Britons, native French, native Germans, etc. So with the demographic change which is taking place in Europe, I mean, you could have a European Union beast, but it'd be an Islamic beast. We don't know, but these are things which we do have to take note of. We have to consider possibilities which we haven't really had to consider before. And of course, we have to pray for the salvation of all those, especially those who were caught up in Islam and are going to experience a Messiahless eternity. Okay, a few more stories, 4 more. We talk about newspaper eschatology. We also talk about those who have been caught speaking presumptuously. This is from July the 13th, yesterday afternoon, from the X channel, Benjamin Rapture Ready. We live in the last days because the Bible says so. All right, I agree with that. Look at the fig tree, for Israel is God's prophetic time clock. Okay, the establishment of the state of Israel is important. Jerusalem shows where the hour hand is, and the Temple Mount shows where we are now. Okay. We are the generation that will not pass away. Previously, we discussed how there can be some different approaches to that. Is it this generation will not pass away, speaking of the period of time which will witness the last days? Or is it this race will not pass away, speaking of God's supernatural preservation of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? But here's the killer. The rapture is coming soon. Okay, so what if in the next 20 years you've spoken presumptuously and you're all wet? Rather than stirring people to pay attention to what's happening in the world, to get themselves right with God, and to be motivated to declare the good news to the lost of planet Earth, you got people all stirred up, ginned up to the rapture is coming soon. And if it doesn't happen soon by your definition, i.e. maybe this fall around Rosh Hashanah, who knows, rather than getting people to perform kingdom work, you're going to contribute to what Peter wrote about when people will say, where is the promise of his coming? That is something I have seen a lot of people fall into. That's why many have abandoned a premillennial prophecy scenario for more of a preterist model or some other model, amillennial, because weren't all these things supposed to happen around the turn of the millennium? I mean, certainly by the 2010s. I mean, the expiration date on a lot of these pre-trib predictions and prognostications has long since passed. This came across my feed yesterday on social media. I thought it was interesting because I've just started to work on the updated edition of the Messianic Sabbath Helper. And there are a lot of people out there, certainly in the Hebrew roots world, but even in the Messianic world, who believe that Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday in order to continue to worship the sun god. Now, there are questions about Constantine in the 4th century, but most evangelical Protestants who keep some kind of Sunday Sabbath or Sunday Lord's Day have some completely different meaning, completely different reasons for this. So here you see somebody from the Reformed Calvinist tradition. I'm just giving this to you as information. He says, it is the Lord's Day. I'm heading to church to worship Almighty God. Fun fact, the Lord's Day is Sunday, the first day of the week, celebrating Christ's resurrection, not the Jewish Sabbath. The early church stopped celebrating the Jewish Sabbath after Jesus' ascension. Everything changed. On the Lord's Day, we gather for worship, celebrating redemption, new creation in Christ, teaching from the scriptures. So this is from someone who believes that because of the Messiah's empty tomb discovered by Sunday morning. The Lord's Day is something new. Sabbath has been abrogated. The Lord's Day is a new Christian institution observed in the first century. Now, this can all be disputed, but the important thing to note is nothing about Constantine in the 4th century. Instead, they're rooting their Sunday observance in the empty tomb of Yeshua discovered by Sunday morning and usages from the early 2nd century of the Lord's Day with some kind of a first day of the week activity going on. That's where our attention in the Sabbath Sunday discussion debate has to be focused. From Visegrad, this is from this morning, July the 14th, all Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip will be eligible for the first time to apply for asylum in France. A lot of people are not happy with this. So, France, you're going to let in all of these Palestinians who want out from the Gaza Strip. That's what a lot of people are approaching it. What's this going to do to your culture? What's this going to do to France as a society? I don't know. We do know that this Gaza Strip situation has to be resolved. And then finally, this was the last news story I came across before getting ready for today's episode from the New York Post. President Trump announced Monday the U.S. will send billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine via Washington's NATO allies, and threatening to impose 100% tariffs on Moscow in 50 days if no peace is struck to end the 40-month-old war. Now, we know that this can definitely be something which is a tactic to get the Russians to resolve this, to get everybody to come to the peace table, to, hey, the United States is going to sell all these weapons to our NATO allies, and they're probably going to then give them to the Ukrainians in some form or fashion. And we're going to put all these tariffs on the Russians if we do not end this. This is a situation which I definitely believe needs to end. I'm not alone in this. It is part, I believe, of the Matthew 24 wars and rumors of wars. But the fact that with Russia, we're dealing with the world's #1 nuclear weapons power means we got to see some resolution to this. And hopefully some kind of an honorable peace can be hammered out. We wait and see. We don't want to be caught practicing newspaper eschatology, reading current events into the Holy Scriptures. We don't want to be ignorant of what's happening either. So a lot of things definitely took place over the weekend. Please, in your quiet time before the Lord, be sure that you issue some kind of prayer for world peace, because we definitely need it. Okay, so this ends our news update for today. And once again, I'm so glad to be back from the Messiah Conference, back with Messianic Insider 5 times a week, and us being able to have our ongoing conversation, because there's so much happening both in the realm of our theology as well as news. And I still believe that the Messianic community has a very significant role to play in the future for God's people leading up to the return of Yeshua. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and donations toward all of our ministry efforts. You can give online at outreachisrael.net/support. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.